Throughout The Lord of the Rings, we witness several figures react in different ways to the One Ring, from attempts to seize it for its power, to rejections of the lure of its power. Frodo Baggins holds the ring for most of the tale, but is there any mention of what Frodo imagines himself doing with the One Ring by keeping it instead of destroying it? This video will look at what Tolkien tells us about the temptation of Frodo. Frodo's temptation is given to us, but not in the published version of The Lord of the Rings. I suppose it can be viewed as quite strange that we don't get a sense of what the One Ring tempts Frodo with in the finished work, as he is the one bearing the burden of the ring throughout the vast majority of the story. There are characters where we understand just what they would do with the One Ring had they the chance, or at least what they believed they would do with it. Gandalf the Grey does not want to be tempted by being offered the One Ring, because he knows he would approach using it from a place of good, defeating Sauron, but still falling to darkness. He will not even take it to keep it safe. Galadriel is also tempted in her test by the idea of supplanting Sauron as a queen of Middle-earth, both loved and feared. I explore this in detail in my video of Galadriel's speech to Frodo. Boromir would muster armies of men, becoming a Lord of Lords, taking the fight to Mordor in order to save his homeland, throwing down Sauron and his minions. Even Sam sees the Vale of Gorgoroth as a garden of flowers, with Sam being hailed as a hero of the age, striding across the darkened land with a flaming sword. Sam rightly sees this as a wild fantasy, gnawing at his will and reason.
He felt that he had from now on only two choices: to forbear the ring, though it would torment him, or to claim it, and challenge the power that sat in its dark hold beyond the Valley of Shadows. Already the ring tempted him, gnawing at his will and reason. Wild fantasies arose in his mind, and he saw Samwise the Strong, hero of the age, striding with the flaming sword across the darkened land, and armies flocking to his call as he marched to the overthrow of Barad-dûr.
What of Frodo? We're never really given a clear moment like this, of any wild fantasy gnawing at his will and reason when it comes to the One Ring. Yet when the moment comes to destroy it, he speaks of his desire to keep it. There are various moments throughout The Lord of the Rings where Frodo is confronted by other ways of using or dealing with the ring. One such moment is in the Barrow, when he and his friends are trapped. He has a wild thought of using the ring to escape, bypassing the terror, abandoning his friends, running free over the grass while grieving for their loss. He even convinces himself that Gandalf would admit there was nothing else he could do, preemptively alleviating the guilt of such an act.
At first Frodo felt as if he had indeed been turned into stone by the incantation. Then a wild thought of escape came to him. He wondered if he put on the ring, whether the Barrow-wight would miss him, and he might find some way out. He thought of himself running free over the grass, grieving for Merry and Sam and Pippin, but free and alive himself. Gandalf would admit that there had been nothing else he could do.
Another moment is when Galadriel tests the heart of Frodo, as she does with all the members of the Company of the Ring. We aren't told what this test meant for Frodo, but I would speculate based on Galadriel's reaction that she tempted Frodo by easing his burden, asking him if he would prefer the ring was passed to someone else, without thinking that she was revealing that she desired it. Frodo would be able to hand it over and be free of the responsibility, returning home without judgment. This is what surprises Galadriel when he turns this test on its head by offering her what she desires, showing he is now seeing with a keen eye
You are wise and fearless and fair, Lady Galadriel, said Frodo. I will give you the One Ring, if you ask for it. It is too great a matter for me.
Galadriel laughed with a sudden clear laugh. Wise the Lady Galadriel may be, yet here she has met her match in courtesy. Gently are you revenged for my testing of your heart at our first meeting. You begin to see with a keen eye.
This is about as far as we get with the temptation of Frodo in the published version. Both situations are quite unique, but don't tell us about an inner struggle for Frodo to keep and use the ring. One situation was the temptation to abandon his duty that he volunteered for, leaving it for someone else to deal with, and the other was the temptation to escape death at the expense of his friends in an understandable life or death situation. We have to go to the history of Middle-earth to read text from an earlier draft. This didn't make it into the finished version, but gives us insight into the mind of Frodo. He seems to hear a deep, slow, persuasive voice speaking, offering life and peace, then rich reward, great wealth, then lordship and power, and finally a share of the great power, if he will take the ring intact to the Dark Tower. He rejects this, but stands still, while thought grows, absurd though it may seem. He will keep it, wield it, and himself have power alone, be master of all. After all, he is a great hero. Hobbits should become lords of men, and he their lord, King Frodo, Emperor Frodo. He thought of the great poems that would be made, and mighty songs, and saw, as if far away, a great feast, and himself enthroned, and all the kings of the world sitting at his feet, while all the earth blossomed. Much like the temptation of Sam described earlier, Frodo's becomes wild and absurd, as if initial temptation didn't go far enough in convincing him. There is a desperate need to tempt him, to stop him in his tracks. It shifts from simple desires to wild fantasies that can apparently only be achieved through keeping this ring. His mind begins with simple desires, life and peace. His journey has almost taken his life, and he was brought into a war of Middle-earth from the peace of the Shire. It is understandable that he would want out. From there, it tempts with rich reward and great wealth, like Bilbo's return from his own adventure. There is more offered as he thinks of lordship and power, before going even further by obtaining a share of the great power. Lordship and power aren't enough. It can be a share of Sauron's power, given to him by the Lord of the Rings himself. Already, we have reached the point of absurdity. Frodo rejects all of this before being tempted by absolute power. Why even share it with Sauron if he can have all of it? He can keep the ring, use it, and become the Lord of the Rings. He's already a great hero for all he's achieved. Why couldn't it be him? He sees hobbits lording over men, with Frodo as King of Kings, better yet, Emperor. The temptation just keeps increasing the possibilities. Finally, he imagines the poems, songs, feasts, and sitting with kings of the world at his feet, while the earth blossoms. Of course, this last temptation would have had Frodo claim the ring openly, drawing Sauron to him, and having the ring returned to the Dark Lord's hand in the end. I think this moment of temptation would have been a great addition to The Lord of the Rings, especially when we compare the temptation of Frodo to what he actually gets when the One Ring is destroyed. He was tempted by the idea of being immortalised in great poems and mighty songs, sitting at feasts with kings, all while the world blossoms. This is exactly what Frodo gets, but not as a king of kings. He is Frodo of the Nine Fingers, celebrated for aiding in the quest to destroy the ring and for defeating Sauron.
Lo, lords and knights and men of valour unashamed, kings and princes and fair people of Gondor, and riders of Rohan, and ye sons of Elrond, and Dunedain of the North, and elf and dwarf, and great hearts of the Shire, and all free folk of the West, now listen to my lay. For I will sing to you of Frodo and the Nine Fingers, and the Ring of Doom. And when Sam heard that, he laughed aloud for sheer delight, and he stood up and cried,
"Oh, great glory and splendor! And all my wishes have come true!"
And then he wept.
Frodo does hold the attention of kings. He is immortalised in song and poetry. The world is blossoming. It is not achieved by wielding the power, but by destroying it. It is just a shame that for Frodo he would never be at peace with himself until he sailed west from the Grey Havens. So, we do know what Tolkien envisioned for Frodo, but it never made it into the story. Frodo was tempted by everything. The closer he reached the Chamber of Fire, the more absurd the temptation seemed. Little did he know that much of those wild fantasies would come to pass in the end, without the need for him to betray himself, his friends, or Middle-earth.